Chapter 5, Beast from Water. The meeting pretty much takes over this entire chapter, the one that Ralph calls from the top of the mountain. He has things that needs addressed. You look in this first huge paragraph, and you get to see Ralph kind of grow up a little bit. You get to see him focus on the task at hand. He says in here that we need to have a real meeting. This meeting must not be fun, but business. Because there's a big description about what the meeting place looked like and how there's this log that kind of teeters around and people every time fall off it and people laugh and have fun and we get off topic, and that can't happen. We need to get these things addressed. And he goes into, about 3 things, I think, and we'll talk about those. But at the beginning, he's pacing by the water and he found himself understanding the wearisomeness of this life, where every path was an improvisation and a considerable part of one's waking life was spent watching one's feet. The improvisation means you make things up as you go about. And every day is just pretty much just looking at your feet, not doing much, head down, not looking up, not looking out, not thinking about what we can do, where we can go, okay, what we can experience. He stopped facing the strip and remembering that first enthusiastic exploration as though it were part of a brighter childhood. He smiled jeeringly. So he started to think about, I remember this first time we were out here, and then we went off and explored and had a good time. How things have changed. I'm getting older now. And it's only been a few months. He goes into detail down at the bottom of that page. After he's going through the speech, what he needs to do. He went carefully over the points of his speech. There must be no mistake about this assembly. No chasing imaginary. He lost himself in a maze of thoughts that were rendered vague by his lack of words to express them. Frowning, he tried again. So he has these feelings, but he lacks the vocabulary. He lacks the thought to, how do I explain this to people? This is what I'm thinking. And so he's struggling. Now, whether he used to have those vocabulary up there and he's kind of lost them, kind of like that Percival kid, he starts to forget his phone number in this chapter because they've been there so long, or he's just so young that he's never had this vocabulary. You can take either one of those. But I can't think of the right words to explain to the people in the meeting. And so he's struggling. Let's see, he notices how the folds were stiff like cardboard and unpleasant. He noticed too how the frayed edges of his shorts were making an uncomfortable pink area, so he's being chafed on the front of his thighs. And with a convulsion of the mind, Ralph discovered dirt and decay and understood how much he disliked perpetually flicking the tangle. So he just kind of started to really focus on, these clothes are chafing. I'm so covered in dirt all the time, and my hair's hanging in my face, and I hate having. So he is thinking, this isn't as glamorous as what people think. Okay? And that gives him the focus to, okay, we're having the meeting, and we need to focus on these things. Okay? The description of the meeting place on page 77 is kind of important because this meeting is taking place at night. And so when they've had these meetings earlier, it's fun and it's in the lights and everybody's happy. But at night, it's a completely different scene. We talked about, have you guys ever been out in the woods before? By yourself or with some people, and it can be kind of spooky at times. Now imagine being out there at nighttime. Maybe you had no problem being out there in the day. At night, it might be a little different. Why? Because it's night. Maybe your mind is a little bit, spookier since you can't see things. Whatever. Okay, there are different thoughts and emotions associated with nighttime as opposed to daytime. Page 79. Right before the meeting starts off, everybody's squatting around and everything, and Ralph is still, he starts off saying, we need an assembly. We need an assembly. And he says that he repeats the simple statements a couple times to reinforce that we need an assembly. It's not just one line and then moving on. And he says that later perhaps practiced debaters, Jack, Maurice, Piggy, would use their whole art to twist the meeting. But now at the beginning, the subject of the debate must be laid out clearly. So he says it again. We need an assembly, not for fun. He needs to make this known. Because what had they just been doing up on the mountain? They're having that celebration. That pig, that dance, everybody's wired up. It's a big day. The emotions of we missed the ship, we're eating, all of these things. We need to refocus. We need to just totally get deprogrammed and come back and look at what's the most significant thing. Bottom of 79, he talks about the water first. He goes, we have lots of assemblies. Everybody enjoys speaking and being together. We decide things. But here's the shift. But they don't get done. We were going to have water brought from the stream and left in those coconut shells under fresh leaves. So it was for a few days. Now there's no water. The shells are dry. People drink from the river. Not that there's anything wrong with drinking from the river. We're capable of going over and drinking, and I drink from the river. That's fine. But we decided that somebody would do that, but we're not doing it anymore. If we start ignoring these little things, then people go, okay, well, nobody is getting yelled at for that, so maybe I don't have to do this other thing. And so we see a breakdown in discipline and authority. We decided that, we're going to do that. Talking about the huts. And then there's huts, shelters. The murmur swelled again and died away. Everybody's tired of hearing about the huts. But they've all agreed, and nobody did anything. You mostly sleep in shelters. Tonight, except for Sam and Eric up by the fire, you'll all sleep there. Who built the shelters? Clamor rose at once. Everyone had built the shelters. Ralph had to wave the conch once more. Wait a minute. I mean, who built all three? We all built the first one. 4 of us the second one, and me and Simon built the last one. Notice Simon helping out, very friendly. Built the last one over there. That's why it's so tottery. So they built the last one together, and it's horrible because they didn't have enough people to help. Don't laugh. That shelter might fall down if the rain comes back. We'll need those shelters then. He paused and cleared his throat. There is another thing, and this one might be the grossest one. Okay, the one that's makes you want to have some sort of structure. There's another thing. We chose those rocks right along beyond the bathing pool as a lavatory, a bathroom. That was sensible too. The tide cleans the place up. You little uns know about that. Okay? So the little uns had stopped using the rocks for the bathrooms. You go to the bathrooms, the tide comes in, cleans it, takes it away. Nice. It's like a big toilet flushing. But you little uns are just going wherever you want. Some of the placing by our food. Going all over the place. Those of you that have pets or a dog outside, if your dog goes all over the place, it's kind of annoying. Because what are you always doing? You're always walking, looking, aren't you? You don't want to step in stuff. But if you had trained your dog or told the little ones you're going to go over there, you can walk around, not have to worry about it. There's no stepping. It's just this breakdown of decisions. We're going to do this. We said we're going to do this, and we're not. We need to refocus. So there's a lot of talking. And then finally, he started talking about the down at the bottom of 80. We've all got to use those rocks again. This place is getting dirty. He paused. The assembly, sensing a crisis, was tensely expected. And then, about the fire. About the fire. The fire is the most important thing on the island. How can we ever be rescued except by luck if we don't keep a fire going? Is a fire too much for us to make? Look at us, how many are we? And yet we can't keep a fire going to make smoke? Don't you understand? Can't you see we ought to? We ought to die before we let the fire out. That's the most important thing. Do you not see that? It's important. It's important, and we must keep that going. We've got to make smoke up there or die. He paused, feeling for his next point, the next thing to talk about. And another thing, someone called out, too many things. So he's starting to get heckled by the crowd. Too many things. There came a mutter of agreement, and Ralph overrode them. And another thing. So asserting his dominance, you be quiet. Because what's he holding? The conch shell, the conch shell. He's holding it, and everybody notices that. Okay? When Jack speaks, he wants it. When Piggy speaks, he wants it. When Maurice, the things pass. So that's the big power, the authority. At the very bottom of 81, he decides that the fire, we will only have fire on the mountain. If you want to cook some food, if you need fire for whatever, You take it up to the mountain. Well, they don't like this because it takes extra steps, extra effort on their part. But he goes, all this I meant to say, now I've said it. You voted me for chief, now you do what I say. They quieted slowly and at last proceeded again. Ralph dropped down and spoke in an ordinary voice. So remember, the rock's for a lavatory. Keep the fire going and smoke showing as a signal. Don't take fire from the mountain. Keep your food up there. Jack stood up, scowling in the gloom, and held out his hands. I haven't finished yet. But you've talked and talked. I've got the conch. So Jack sat down. So we see Jack being treated like everyone else. And you've heard the term alpha male, right? The head of a lion pack, an alpha male. We have two distinct alpha males here. And Ralph is clearly in charge with that conch shell, with the chief. But we see Jack having his own power as well. And this is kind of important. After he's mentioned these things, on 82 he goes, things are breaking up. I don't understand why. We began well. We were happy. And then he moved the conch gently, looking beyond them at nothing. Remembering the beastie, the snake, the fire, the talk of fear. Then people started getting frightened. So everything was going fine. But then people started getting frightened. About what? About these suspected beasts and beasties they call it. About the snakes, about all of these thoughts. About the darkness, the fear. He set the conch shell down in the bottom of the 82. Jack stood up and took the conch. So this is a meeting to find out what's what. I'll tell you what's what. And look who he blames. You little ones started all this with the fear talk. Beasts, where from? Of course we're frightened sometimes, but we put up with being frightened. Only Ralph says you scream in the night. What does that mean? But nightmares. Anyway, you don't hunt or build or help. You're a lot of crybabies and sissies, that's what. And as for the fear, you'll have to put up with that like the rest of us. So in essence, he's telling the kids, the little kids, to man up, quit fussing around. You're the ones to blame. Is this a good leader, folks?
No.
No. You don't degrade your troops like that. Ralph wasn't babying them along, but he didn't talk to them like this. Ralph looked at Jack open mouthed, but Jack took no note, kind of like, are you kidding? What are you doing? The thing is, fear can't hurt you any more than a dream. There aren't any beasts to be afraid of on this island. Serve you right if something did get you, you useless lot of crybabies. But there is no animal. He says later that, well then, I've been all over this island by myself. If there were a beast, I'd have seen it. Be frightened because you're like that, but there is no beast in the forest. So he's saying, I've been all over this island. I would have seen it. I would have seen signs. The only thing they've seen are pigs. And if you're worried about a big animal like lions and tigers, those things aren't found on little islands because there isn't enough food to sustain them, right? The biggest thing they've seen are pigs. So there are no beasts, kids, but you're going to be frightened, so you be frightened the best you can. Piggy eventually gets the conch and starts to address, saying that, there was a little one that's scared, that had seen something. Oh, where's it at? Piggy says, I know, on 84, I know there isn't no beast, not with claws and all that. But I know there isn't no fear either, unless what? Unless we get frightened of people. And so the fear might not be directed towards beasts and stuff. The fear might be, the only true fear that they should have might be about people. That might be what causes fear. Do you think little ones are scared of Jack? This kid with the knife covered in paint that kills pigs, and now you have little ones and he's yelling at? Probably. There's a little one named, what's his name? Phil. At the bottom of 84, carrying over to 85. Phil actually saw something in the middle of the night. Okay? He says he was having a dream. And then top of 85. Then I was frightened and I woke up and I was outside the shelter by myself in the dark and the twisty things had gone away. And I was frightened and started to call out for Ralph. And then I saw something moving among the trees. Something big and horrid. So something that completely contradicts what Jack and everybody else was saying. Okay, so he saw something moving. Ralph held out his hands for the conch and the little and sat down. You were asleep. There wasn't anyone there. How could anyone be wandering about in the forest at night? Was anyone? Did anyone go out? There was a long pause while the assembly grinned at the thought of anyone going out in the darkness. How silly. No one would go out because they're scared of the beastie. But the darkness, who would walk around in the middle of the dark? Then Simon stood up and Ralph looked at him in astonishment. You? What were you mucking around in the dark for? Simon grabbed the conch convulsively. I wanted to go to a place. A place I know. What place? Just a place I know. Do we recall what place that is? Do you remember his little hiding place? Okay, where he felt real calm and quiet, and that in the bushes. Okay, and then he looks out and there's that clearing right there. He likes to go back there, and so that's where he was headed. And then Jack goes, he was taken short. So he was sick. He had diarrhea. He had to use the bathroom. He was taken short. And so, because pooping is funny. Okay, so that got people chuckling and Simon humiliated. Okay. Well, don't do it again. Understand? Not at night, because you'll scare people. Simon on the top of 86. Everybody was laughing. The derisive laughter that rose, and fear in it, and condemnation. Simon opened his mouth to speak, but Ralph had the conch, so he backed to his seat. So Jack will speak out even if he doesn't have the conch. He might get shut up and shut down, but he speaks up. Simon wanted to say something, but he doesn't have the conch. And so what does he do? He follows the rules and sits down. See these things about Simon? We've got to keep track of these little things that he does because they all add up and they're pretty important. Piggy says that there's a little one, him. And so they push Percival forward. And it's interesting. Ralph has a statement in here, about third or fourth line of the paragraph. Ralph remembered another small boy who had stood like this, and he flinched away from the memory. He thinks back to that mulberry-colored kid, the one who said about the beastie and snakes the first time. And he has this flashback, and he shook it away. Because no one has seen that kid. And they think that fire probably blew that kid up and burned that kid alive forever ago. At the bottom of 86, Percival, they ask what his name is. Percival, Wems, Madison, the Vicarage, Harcourt Street, Anthony Hand's telephone. He can't remember his telephone number. When you were a kid, didn't your folks or guardians make you memorize your name, phone number, address? Okay? And then you know that. You recite that. But time has passed where he hasn't had to think about it and he starts to forget. He can't remember his telephone number. How long would it take for you guys to be away from home without phones before you would forget your phone number? Years? Maybe? I don't know. Would you eventually remember it because it's so ingrained in your mind? I don't know. But anyways, the discussion goes on that he whispers to Jack about where there might be a beast. You say there's no beast here, but he says maybe there's a beast in the water. And if I'm Ralph and you guys are the kids, the moment they say that, and it's dark for the most part, can you imagine everybody just kind of shifting and looking out at that water? Maurice stands up and goes, my dad says that we haven't figured out everything that's out there. There might be, I've heard about squids that are several hundred meters long that eat whales. There are monsters, and it could be monsters and things out in the sea that we don't know about, that we haven't figured out yet, that haven't been discovered. Maybe the beast that we're fearful of and have been seeing comes out of the water. So if they had been doing a good job at shutting down the fear, do you think that they just threw gasoline on that fire? Okay, Maurice, one of the semi-biggins and such, he takes up the conch and he discusses about my daddy says there are things in the water, all of these other issues. And then he actually credits Piggy and Piggy's intelligence. He says, as Piggy says, life's scientific, but we don't know, do we? Not certain. I mean, they can't definitively say yes or no because they just don't know. And he actually gives some credibility to Piggy and his intellect by agreeing with what Piggy was saying about their, life is scientific. There might be things. At the end of this chapter, the kids are resigned to thinking that it's a ghost. And so they're voting on ghosts, and Piggy stands up and goes, I want you to remember that I didn't say there was ghosts. You are being ridiculous. What are the grown-ups going to say? and that's where it ultimately breaks the meeting up. A squid couldn't come out of the water. Couldn't. In a moment, the platform was full of arguing, gesticulating shadows. So it was just, remember, it's dark now, so they can barely see anything. And everybody's all this commotion, and then Ralph finally sees, Simon. Simon was close to him. He laid hands on the conch. Simon felt a perilous necessity to speak, but to speak in assembly was a terrible thing to him. Maybe, he said hesitantly, maybe there is a beast. The assembly cried out savagely, and Ralph stood up in amazement. You, Simon, you believe in this? I don't know. His heartbeats were choking him, and then the storm broke. Now, not a real storm, but a figurative storm, because all heck broke loose with all of these people back. Sit down, shut up, take the conch. Sod you, shut up. Ralph shouted, hear him. He's got the conch. And so they try with that conch shell to keep some order. What I mean is, maybe it's only us, is what he's saying. Maybe the fear on this island is really just fear of each other, fear of, the darkness of what humans can be, the darkness of mankind. There isn't, what he's saying is maybe there isn't a physical beast on the island, maybe there isn't a physical beast in the water. Maybe the only beast is us, okay, and whatever fear and whatever trouble that we create. So a kind of astute observation here by a child. Towards the end of it says that Simon's effort fell about him in ruins. The laughter beat him cruelly, and he shrank away defenseless to his seat. So you can almost imagine that kid just quietly stepping back and sitting down, even though he probably had one of the most realistic answers. Someone spoke out of turn. Maybe he means it's some sort of ghost. So somebody starts to throw out meaning, or trying to clear up what Simon meant, and it doesn't. An anonymous voice on the next page, 90, says, perhaps that's what the beast is, a ghost. So then they ultimately have to have a vote at the bottom. Who thinks there may be ghosts? For a long time there was silence and no apparent movement. Then Ralph peered into the gloom and made out the hands. He spoke flatly. I see. And then Ralph and Piggy, and probably Simon as well, feel that this is just silly. Okay? Really? You think there are ghosts? Really? Piggy gets upset on 91. What are we? Humans? We're animals. We're savages. What's grown-ups going to think? Going off hunting pigs, letting fires out. And now, a shadow fronted him tempestuously, excuse me. Who's that shadow? Jack. Well, look at what he was just saying. He was ripping on the hunting. Look at us hunting pigs, letting fires out. Who's responsible for all that? Jack. And so the shadow stands up in front of him. You shut up, you fat slug. There was a moment's struggle, and the glimmering conch jigged up and down. Ralph leapt to his feet. Jack, you haven't got the conch. Let him speak. Jack's face swam near him, so he turned on Ralph. And you shut up. Who are you anyway, sitting there telling people what to do? You can't hunt. You can't sing. Isn't that just a silly statement? You can't sing. Remember, Jack said that he should be leader from the beginning because he's in charge of the choir and because I can sing a high C. Like that's means something in giving orders and leading. Doesn't that seem kind of silly? That should be one of those little lines that, okay, well, you don't hunt. Okay, you may have an argument there if that is a big thing, but to get rescued, hunting's not a big deal. And you can't sing? Well, that just sounds silly. And Ralph isn't going to, no matter how much people think he's a leader, he's probably not going to be able to sing like Jack. And so Jack is always going to have something over him, which is just a silly thing. The rules, shouted Ralph. You're breaking the rules. Who cares? Ralph summoned his wits. Because the rules are the only thing we've got. Okay? It's that connection to their home and society with these rules. And remember, Jack really wanted these rules at the beginning. Even though he wasn't in charge, he goes, yeah, because if we have rules and somebody breaks them, what can we have? What happens if you break rules? You get punished. And so he was looking forward to the punishments that would befall on people, because he probably wanted to give out some of those punishments. And so now he's saying, who cares about the rules? And then Jack says, who cares? Ralph summoned his wits, because the rules are the only things we've got. Okay, Ralph is very emotional at this time. This is when it breaks up. Him and the hunters take off. He gave a wild whoop and leapt down to the pale sand. At once the platform was full of noise and excitement, scrambling, screams, and laughter. The assembly shredded away. What's grown-ups going to say? Cried Piggy again. Look at him. The sound of mock hunting, historical laughter, and real terror came from the beach. Blow the conch, Ralph. Piggy was so close to Ralph could see the glint of his one glass. There's the fire. Can't they see? You've got to be tough now. Make them do what you want. Ralph answered in the cautious voice of one who rehearses a theorem. This is important. If I blow the conch and they don't come back, then we've had it. We shan't keep the fire going. We'll be like animals. We'll never be rescued. If I blow the conch and they don't come back, then we've had it. Do you see the importance of that line? That kind of goes hand in hand with the other page. The rules are the only thing we have. In essence, if we don't have those, we've got nothing. And so if I blow the conch shell, which has summoned people before, if I blow it and they don't come back, do you see how it took all the power away from summoning meetings? Some of them might come back, all of them might not. The next time he wants to hold a meeting, somebody will go, oh, well, people didn't show up last time, it's not a big deal. Do you see how that can undermine the integrity of that meeting and that power and that shell? The integrity of the leader, the integrity of making those choices, okay, making those tough decisions that Jack obviously doesn't agree with now, but those choices and decisions have to be made. And if people don't back them up, that can be important. So there's a lot of maturity here in Ralph, where he says, if I blow the conch and they don't come back, then we've had it. We shan't keep the fire going. We'll be like animals. We'll never be rescued. Never be rescued. Page 93, Ralph and Piggy are still there. Ralph says he should quit. I ought to give up being chief. Hear him. Oh, Lord, oh no, Piggy gripped Ralph's arm. If Jack was chief, he'd have all hunting and no fire. We'd be here till we died. His voice ran up to a squeak. Who's that sitting there? Me, Simon. Fat lot of good we are, said Ralph. 3 blind mice. I'll give up. If you give up, said Piggy in an appalled whisper. What had happened to me? What's Piggy really worried about? Losing his shield. Losing his protection, the person that stands up for him. Not that they're buddy-buddy friends, but he's afraid of, Ralph, you're going to lose your power that has Jack shut up and sit down up till now, for the most part. Okay, what's going to happen to me? Piggy's kind of, the right-hand man to the person in charge. He has a little bit of protection afforded to him. And if something happens to Ralph, Piggy, what'll happen to me? Yes, he cares about the fire and being rescued and all of that, but ultimately we see Piggy concerned about himself. 94, at the very last page. Simon says that Piggy's right, Ralph. There's you and Jack. Go on being chief, meaning it's kind of the lesser of two evils. You might not want to be it, but think about what it would be like if Jack were in charge. It'd be horrible. You've got to stay. And Simon doesn't say a lot in this book thus far, but when he speaks or when he does an action, it's very resounding. Okay, there's a lot of weight behind it. Look at what Ralph and Piggy talk about. Piggy says, I wish my Annie was here, and then Ralph goes, I wish my father. he was going to say the same thing, was here or would rescue us. He goes, oh, what's the use? Someone says, keep the fire going. The dance was over and the hunters were going back to the shelters. Grown-ups know things, said Piggy. They ain't afraid of the dark. They wouldn't quarrel. They'd build a ship. They wouldn't set fire to the island. They wouldn't break my specs. They wouldn't talk about a beast. If only they could get a message to us, cried Ralph desperately. If only they could send us something grown up, a sign or something. So he means something, that reminds them of adults, reminds them of where they came from, getting away from the games, kind of refocusing the populace of students, or kids, into the proper mindset or mind frame of what they need to be, okay, in order to be rescued. And if only grown-ups could get us something, if only there could be a sign. The last paragraph. A thin wail out of the darkness chilled them and set them grabbing for each other. Then the wail rose, remote and unearthly, and turned to an inarticulate gibbering. Percival Wems Madison of the Vicarage, Harcourt, St. Anthony, lying in the long grass, was living through circumstances in which the incantation of his address was powerless to help him. So, in essence, something's happening to that little boy right now. Whether that beating and hunting is going on, but probably, since they've all broken up and gone back to their shelters, it's probably more about he's scared to death about beasties, ghosts, things from the water, whatever. Snakes, all of that stuff. And he's fussing and fussing. And that last line about where it names his address and all that, no incantation, no memorization or repetition of your phone number and address. Nothing is going to help him. Okay? You deal with the pain or the fear, the torment, the torture, the nightmares that he's going through right now. Okay? But hold on to these last thoughts of Ralph. If only they could get us a message. If only something can focus up us as a group. Okay? Because that's big. And that leads us into the next chapter. Was it Beast from Air?